Hi, my name is Martha Penrose. I'm 64 years old, and this is my story. It all started on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life, my birthday. But instead of laughter, balloons, or even a slice of cake, I was handed a bag, a folded sweater, and a one-way ride to a place that would change me forever. What my son didn't know was that the moment he closed the door behind me at that nursing home, he opened another one inside me. A door that led to secrets, strength I didn't know I had, and a plan for vengeance I never thought I'd embrace. I wasn't always the kind of woman who thought about revenge. I used to be soft-spoken, the kind of mother who baked cookies from scratch, wrote Christmas cards in cursive, and knitted scarves in the winter even though no one in Montgomery really needed them. I was that mother, that friend, that woman. I married young, Mark Penrose, a hard-working man with rough hands and a gentler soul. He was a mechanic, honest, loyal, and unfortunately taken from me far too soon. A heart attack at 52. I still remember the day he left for work and never came back. We had one child, Brian, our pride and joy, or so I thought. Brian was brilliant. Even as a child, he spoke like he had lived another life before this one. He read books beyond his age, asked philosophical questions, and never quite looked people in the eye. I didn't realize until much later that brilliance, when untethered from compassion, can rot into something cold, something cruel. After Mark died, everything became about Brian. I worked 2 jobs, first at the local diner, then as a receptionist at a dental office, so he could go to college out of state. I sold my mother's jewelry, refinanced the house, and never once hesitated. Because that's what mothers do. We give. Even when there's nothing left to give, we find something, time, energy, pieces of ourselves, and we give. He got into Duke, graduated with honors, law school, internships, high-paying jobs. He climbed, and I watched with pride from the ground floor. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to follow how I turned heartbreak, abandonment, and betrayal into strength, purpose, and legacy. The calls came less frequently, then barely at all, but I didn't mind. He was building a life, and I understood that. I kept sending him letters, cards, sometimes baked goods, though I wasn't sure he ever got them. I imagined he was busy, traveling, maybe even starting a family of his own. It was around my 64th birthday when I noticed the house was feeling too big, too empty. My arthritis was worse than ever. Mornings were harder, stairs a cruel daily obstacle. But I never said anything to Brian, never asked for help. Then came the birthday, March 3rd. I remember the sunlight through the kitchen window like it was mocking me, bright and cheerful while everything else felt off. Brian called that morning. His voice was unusually formal. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, followed by a pause. "Listen, I've made some arrangements for you. I'm flying down today." My heart fluttered. Arrangements? Was he throwing me a party? Coming to surprise me with a visit? Maybe a cruise? I imagined his arms around me, imagined him bringing a grandchild I didn't know existed. I smiled for the first time in weeks. He showed up by noon. In a black Lincoln sedan he didn't drive himself. A man in a uniform stepped out, opened the door for him. Brian looked polished, expensive, like a man in a commercial for luxury watches. He barely glanced at the porch before stepping inside. His eyes scanned the living room with a quiet distaste. "I see you haven't changed much," he said, almost like it was a weakness. I asked him if he wanted lunch. He declined, said we were going somewhere. "Where?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just said it would be better this way, that I'd be safer, cared for. It wasn't until we pulled up to a beige, sterile-looking building on the edge of town that I realized what was happening. A nursing home, Magnolia Hills. The kind of place with fake smiles, antiseptic smells, and loneliness wrapped in polite words. He didn't look at me when he handed the staff my insurance papers. He didn't cry. He didn't explain. He just signed me in, handed me a floral duffel bag I hadn't packed, and left. No goodbye. No, "I love you." No birthday. The nurses were kind, in that detached, professional way. They showed me to a room with pale green walls and curtains that refused to open all the way. I sat on the edge of the bed, numb, staring at the cup of orange juice they'd brought me as a welcome gift. My birthday gift. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there, the silence pressing into my chest, until the sound of a woman humming in the next room cracked me open, and I wept. I wept not because I was abandoned, but because I realized something I had never dared to admit before. My son didn't love me. Not really. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. That night, I unpacked the bag Brian brought. There were 3 sweaters, 2 pairs of pants, some slippers, and, tucked in the side pocket, my will. The will I had written 2 years ago, naming him as sole beneficiary, my house, my life insurance, everything. He had taken it from the drawer in my bedroom, and that's when something shifted in me. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of my life. Mark's laugh, Brian's first steps, the years of love I gave like an open faucet, and the drain it disappeared into. By morning, I was no longer just Martha Penrose, the sweet woman who baked banana bread and lived in denial. I was something else, something steel. And steel does not bend easily. It sharpens. I requested a meeting with the facility's lawyer the next day. I still had rights. I still had a mind. And it was sharper now than it had ever been. What Brian didn't know was that I had another will. A draft I kept at the bank, never signed, never shared. Until now. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Magnolia Hills operated like a well-oiled machine. Scheduled meals, medication times, soft music in the halls, and polite staff who rarely made eye contact for longer than a few seconds. The other residents floated in and out of activities like ghosts in cardigans, some tethered to reality, others to memories no one else could see. I kept to myself. I wasn't ready to smile or pretend. I had too many thoughts swirling in my mind to sit through bingo or knitting circles. I began asking questions, quietly at first, to the right people. I found out more than I expected. The lawyer employed by the facility, Mr. Aldridge, was a man in his 50s, kind but meticulous. When I told him I wanted to revoke my previous will, his eyes flickered with something like surprise. Maybe he thought I was just another fading mind, but he quickly realized I was still sharper than ever. I explained everything to him, my son's actions, the suspicious timing, the document I found in my own bag. He didn't say much, but he listened carefully. "I'll help you draft a new one," he said. "But you should be aware. Your son might contest this." "Let him," I replied. "It'll be the first real fight of his life." I told Mr. Aldridge that I didn't want Brian to receive a single cent from me. Not the house, not the life insurance, not even my collection of books. I wanted everything redirected, but not just to a charity or some faceless organization. I wanted my legacy to go where it would be noticed, where it would serve as a message. That's when I started spending more time in the community room. Not because I cared to socialize, but because I needed to observe. I began paying attention to people, their stories, their faces. Many had no family left. Others had been dropped off and forgotten, much like me. But some were kind, real. There was Ruthie, who painted watercolors of sunrises and sunsets, even though her eyesight was failing. There was Gerald, who used to be a high school teacher and recited poetry to himself when he thought no one was listening. And there was Florence, a woman who once ran a women's shelter in Birmingham and had lost everything in a fire 2 years ago. I started writing, pages and pages in a spiral notebook they gave me. I wrote down their names, their stories, what they needed, what they didn't have. My idea started forming like a photograph in darkroom solution, slowly, then all at once. I would use what I had not to fade away, but to shine a light on people the world tried to forget. Meanwhile, Brian's silence continued. Not a call, not a letter, not even a check-in to see if I was settling in. That hurt more than the drop-off. It confirmed what I already suspected. I was a task completed, an item crossed off a list, but life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you need when you stop begging for it. One morning I was sitting in the courtyard scribbling down a memory about Mark, how he once danced with me in the kitchen to an old Johnny Cash song, when a nurse named Emily approached me. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with a kindness that didn't feel rehearsed. "Mrs. Penrose, may I sit?" she asked. I nodded. I just wanted to say, "I think it's amazing how you're always writing. Most people here, they just stop. But you seem like you're getting started." Her words struck me deeper than I expected. I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "I am," I said, "for the first time in a long while." She asked what I was writing, and I told her. About the people here. About what we lose when we stop listening to stories. She sat with me for almost an hour, telling me how she dreamed of opening her own senior care home one day. One that felt like a real home, not an institution. I told her to keep dreaming. Then I paused. "What if," I said slowly, "you had the means to do it?" She looked confused. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer directly. I just looked at her and smiled again. That evening, I made a note in my journal. Emily James, future recipient. Around the third week, Brian called. Or rather, his assistant did. "This is Karen Lee," she said flatly. "Mr. Penrose asked me to check in. Is everything all right?" "I don't know," I replied. "Why don't you ask Mr. Penrose if he thinks things are all right?" She paused. "Would you like me to pass along a message?" "Yes," I said. "Tell him I'm rewriting my will." There was silence. Then a clipped, "Okay, I'll let him know," and she hung up. The next day, Brian showed up. He wore the same tailored suit, the same watch, and the same disinterested face. But this time, his eyes had a flicker of urgency. "Mom," he said, stepping into my room, "I got your message." "No," I replied. "You got my intention." He looked around, disgust barely veiled. "This place? You shouldn't be here. It's beneath you." "Then why did you bring me here?" I asked, folding my hands calmly in my lap. He hesitated. "I thought it would be best. You're not well. You're getting older. I'm not dying, Brian," I said. "I'm living. Probably more now than I did when I was in that house, waiting for a son who stopped being a son the day he started seeing me as a burden." His jaw clenched. "You can't just cut me out of everything." "I can," I said, "and I will." He stepped forward. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to make sure you were taken care of?" "Taken care of?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You dumped me here like spoiled milk on a warm day." He stared at me, searching for the mother he once manipulated, but she wasn't there. She was gone. "I built your life," I said, "from the ground up, and now I'll build someone else's." He left in a fury, muttering something about legal action. I didn't flinch. That evening, I finalized my new will with Mr. Aldridge. I divided my assets among people I had only known for weeks, but who had shown me more compassion than my own blood. I set aside a generous portion for Emily to help her start her own care home, with stipulations that it be built with dignity, warmth, and love. I gave Ruthie an art scholarship in her name for visually impaired youth. Gerald's share went to funding poetry programs in underfunded high schools. Florence would have a memorial garden built at the shelter she once ran, rebuilt in her name. And Brian? He got nothing. Not a penny. Not a keepsake. Not even a footnote. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I was vindictive, but because, for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. And in doing so, I had chosen people who saw me as more than an obligation. People who reminded me that my story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. I thought that final conversation with Brian would be the last I'd ever hear from him. I imagined he would stomp out of the facility, slam his expensive car door, and return to whatever life he had built far away from me, licking his wounds and nursing his pride. But people like Brian don't go quiet when something valuable slips through their fingers, especially not when they believe it belonged to them all along. It started subtly, like a ripple across calm water. A week after the new will had been notarized and filed, Mr. Aldridge came to see me in my room. He had that careful, tight-lipped look lawyers wear when they don't want to worry you too soon. "There's been a request," he said gently. "Your son has filed an inquiry, questioning your mental competency at the time you signed the new will." I looked at him, stunned at first. Not because I didn't expect it, but because of how fast it happened. Brian hadn't wasted any time. He was going for the one thing that might undo everything I had so carefully rebuilt. My mind. "He's arguing I'm senile?" I asked. "Not in those words, but yes. Aldridge said. He claims you've been emotionally manipulated by staff and that you're suffering from diminished capacity. Let him come, I said, almost with a laugh. I'd love to show him just how diminished I'm not. But the laughter faded quickly, because I knew what came next. I would be observed, evaluated, prodded, tested. They sent a psychologist, a woman named Dr. Keller. I was polite, cooperative, but every question, every pen tap against her clipboard, reminded me of how fragile this moment was, how easy it would be for someone to twist a fumbled answer into proof of incompetence. One misplaced date, one confused name. That's all it would take for Brian to walk away with everything again. Do you know what day it is? She asked. Tuesday, I said, and the anniversary of the day I gave up sugar, 14 years. She smiled slightly. Can you spell world backward? DLROW, I replied without hesitation. Want me to do inheritance next? It went on for an hour. Memory games, logic puzzles, emotional assessments. At the end of it, she gave me a firm nod. You're very sharp, Mrs. Penrose. Sharper than my son hoped, I said. When she left, I sat by the window and watched the breeze rustle through the magnolia trees outside. I thought of Mark, what he'd say if he were here. I imagined him shaking his head, that soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You always were stronger than you knew, he'd say. But I didn't feel strong, not yet. I felt tired, not physically, but soul deep, the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. And then the letter came. It was delivered by hand, slipped into my room in an envelope with expensive parchment. I knew the stationery. Brian always did like dramatic flair. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was a warning. Mother, it began. If you persist with this charade, if you continue allowing these people to poison your judgment, I will have no choice but to pursue this legally and aggressively. There is still time to come to your senses. This facility is beneath you. The choices you're making are beneath your legacy. Let me help you. Sign the papers I've attached and revoke this new will before things get messy. Brian. There was a power of attorney form clipped behind it. He thought I would be scared. He thought I would fold. What he didn't understand, what he had never understood, was that the woman who once folded laundry and folded her opinions to make space for his ego was gone. That Martha Penrose had been buried under years of obedience and sacrifice. But in this place, in this sterile little room with its mint green curtains, I had unearthed something truer, harder, older than motherhood, and far more permanent than fear. So I didn't call him. I called a friend. His name was Walter, and he had once been a prosecutor in Mobile before retiring early due to a stroke that left his speech slightly slowed, but his mind razor sharp. He lived in Magnolia Hills now, too, a few rooms down from mine, and we'd begun having lunch together most afternoons. I've seen this kind of manipulation before, he said, looking at the letter with narrowed eyes. This is coercive, veiled threat, classic. I smiled. Can we fight it? He looked up. We don't have to fight it, Martha. We expose it. He suggested we contact the local paper, not with a sob story, but with a feature. A thoughtful opinion piece about elder autonomy, about abuse that wears a suit and tie, about sons who see their parents as assets to manage, not people to honor. We wrote it together. The article ran 2 weeks later in the Montgomery Daily. The headline read, Inheritance or Independence? One woman's fight to keep her voice in the face of family greed. It was a hit. It spread faster than I expected. Suddenly, I was being contacted for interviews. I spoke on local radio, my voice trembling but resolute. I talked about the danger of legal manipulation, of children who weaponize mental health to gain control. I used my name. I used Brian's name. And people listened. More than that, they rallied. Dozens of letters began to pour in from other elderly people, men and women who had experienced similar betrayals, similar exiles. They wrote about daughters who seized houses, grandsons who forged documents, nephews who disappeared after the estate settled. It wasn't just my story. It was ours. I gave every one of those letters to Walter and Emily, and together, we started drafting something bigger, a proposal, a foundation, a fund, something that could legally represent seniors facing the same kind of silent aggression I had endured. It would bear my name, not for pride, but for memory. The more noise we made, the more uncomfortable Brian became. He sent another letter, shorter, colder. You're embarrassing yourself, and me. Stop this before it's too late. But it was too late. Because by now, the truth had taken root in the public square, and the legal system doesn't like to look away when the spotlight gets too bright. Brian's contest of my will was formally dismissed after Dr. Keller's report came in. She had written a scathing rebuttal to his claim of diminished capacity, calling it unsubstantiated and ethically concerning. Mr. Aldridge handed me a copy with a grin on his face. When the ruling came through, I sat alone in my room for a long time, not crying, not laughing, just breathing, slow, deep, whole. I thought of Mark. I thought of all the nights I lay awake worrying about Brian's happiness, his future, his approval. How many times had I swallowed my own opinion to make room for his ego? How many times had I made myself smaller so he could feel big? Never again. From that moment forward, I stopped living in fear of being seen as difficult. I was difficult, for the right reasons. And now that I had found my voice, I wasn't about to lose it again. The phone rang the next morning. It was Emily. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "A woman just came in asking about you. She said she read the article and wants to help fund the care home I told you about." I closed my eyes, smiling. "Tell her," I said softly, "that I've been waiting for her." The sun in Montgomery that spring felt different. It was the same light I'd seen my whole life, golden, persistent, heavy with humidity. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped beneath it. I felt taller, like I could finally stand straight without the invisible weight of silence pressing on my back. Something inside me had shifted, not just the anger, not just the pride, but the quiet, enduring knowledge that I had taken back what was mine, my voice, my dignity, my story. Emily knocked on my door that morning with a kind of light in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Behind her stood a woman in a beige linen suit with a leather notebook pressed to her chest. Her name was Catherine Monroe, a philanthropist and founder of several local outreach programs for underserved communities. She had read my article, seen my interviews, and come not just to meet me, but to join me. She listened carefully as Emily explained the vision for the new senior care home. A place where elders weren't just parked in wheelchairs and forgotten. A place that prioritized community, creativity, and the right to grow old with joy and purpose. "And what do you see your role being in this?" Catherine asked, turning to me with the air of someone genuinely curious. I smiled. "I'm not just funding it, I'm shaping it. I've lived the consequences of what happens when people forget that aging doesn't mean disappearing. We've earned our years. Now we deserve to live them with pride." Catherine nodded slowly, and in that moment, I knew this was happening, not just as a fantasy scribbled in a notebook, but as a living, breathing future. Later that day, I met with Walter in the courtyard under the crepe myrtle trees, where the air was thick with blossoms and possibility. "You're becoming a bit of a local celebrity," he chuckled. I shrugged. "Better late than never." He leaned forward, more serious now. "You've started something, Martha. Something bigger than Brian, bigger than this facility. Are you ready for that?" I thought about that for a moment. All my life I had waited for permission, waited to be asked, to be noticed, to be invited. Now I was writing the invitation, and yes, I was ready. We began assembling a board for the new foundation. Walter as legal counsel, Emily as director. Catherine pledged an initial donation. And me? I was the founder, the face, the heartbeat of the cause. The project was named the Penrose Initiative, not for prestige, but as a reminder. A reminder that there is power in reclaiming your name after someone tried to bury it beneath convenience and shame. Each week, I met with the others in the activity room, which we now jokingly referred to as headquarters. We brainstormed policies, design plans, even potential locations. I began giving public talks at local churches, community centers, even high schools. Every room I walked into, I stood a little straighter. My knees still ached, and my hands still curled slightly from arthritis, but my spirit had never stood taller. There were setbacks, of course. People questioned our legitimacy, A few critics said I was exploiting a personal tragedy for attention. One local paper even ran a tone-deaf piece titled, "Elderly Woman Turns Nursing Home Woes into Cash Flow." But those who knew the truth stood by me. One night, I found myself alone in the chapel at Magnolia Hills. The stained glass windows cast fractured reds and blues onto the tiled floor. I sat in the front pew, staring at the flickering candles. I spoke aloud, though no one else was there. "Mark, I hope you're watching. I hope you know that I finally stopped being afraid." A tear slid down my cheek, but not out of grief. It was something else, something closer to joy, or release. For so long I had carried not just my pain but the quiet pain of others, mothers like me, left behind, women whose stories would never be printed. I wasn't just speaking for myself anymore. The next day, Brian showed up again, not in a suit this time. No driver, no clipped attitude. He looked tired, ruffled, slightly smaller than I remembered. He stood outside my door, uncertain. When I invited him in, he sat down without speaking for a long time. "You really did it," he said finally. "You humiliated me." "I didn't humiliate you," I said calmly. "You did that to yourself." He looked at the floor. "The media, the foundation, the community's talking about you like you're some kind of hero." "I'm not a hero," I said. "I'm just someone who got tired of being used." Silence stretched between us. Then he looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw something raw in his expression. Regret? Maybe. Or maybe just the recognition that I was no longer the woman he could control. "I didn't think you had this in you," he admitted. "Neither did I replied. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A photo. It was from when he was 6, standing with Mark and me in front of the old oak tree in our backyard. I remembered the day vividly. Brian had lost his first tooth and refused to smile because he hated the gap. Mark had made a goofy face, trying to get him to laugh. "I keep this in my office," Brian said, placing it on my side table. "You never called," I said softly. "After everything, not once." I didn't know what to say. "Then say it now." He hesitated. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "But I didn't say I forgive you. Not yet. Some words require more than breath to be meaningful. Some words have to be earned." He stood to leave. "If you ever need anything." "I don't," I said. "But thank you." After he left, I stared at that photo for a long time. I wasn't sure if his visit had been a genuine attempt at connection or just another performance, but either way, I didn't feel shaken. I felt settled. Weeks turned into months. The Penrose Initiative held its first fundraiser gala at a historic theater downtown. The entire Magnolia Hills staff attended, along with over 200 guests. I wore a deep navy dress with pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. When I stepped onto the stage to deliver my speech, the crowd quieted. "My name is Martha Penrose," I said into the microphone. "I'm 64 years old. I was abandoned, dismissed, and underestimated, but not anymore. Tonight we celebrate a truth that should never be forgotten. Our value doesn't decrease with age. Our voices don't fade with time. If anything, they grow stronger, and from now on, they will be heard." The applause was thunderous. I wasn't used to the sound, but I let it wash over me. It felt like a benediction. The home broke ground 6 weeks later. Emily brought me the first blueprint rolled up in a silver tube. I opened it with trembling hands and laid it across my lap. There it was. The rooms, the gardens, the library, my name at the bottom in cursive. "This is yours," she whispered. "No," I said. "It's ours. I still live at Magnolia Hills. For now, but my days are full. Planning, meeting, writing, and sometimes just sitting in the garden, listening to the wind. I've come to love the stillness, not as emptiness, but as space. Space to breathe, to remember, to become. I don't think I'll ever forget the pain of that birthday, the quiet cruelty of being treated like a burden, but I also won't forget what came after, the strength I found, the people I met, the purpose I claimed. Brian calls sometimes now. The conversations are brief, careful, but there's something healing in that too. Not everything needs to be tied up in a perfect bow. Some relationships remain complicated, fractured, but no longer bleeding. And me? I'm not finished yet. There's still work to do, still stories to tell, still fires to light. The day of the opening ceremony for the Penrose home arrived with a weight in the air that I couldn't quite describe. It was more than just excitement. It was history pressing against the present, the culmination of quiet sacrifices, late-night journaling, heated legal battles, and the resolve to rise even when everything tried to push me down. The new facility stood proudly on a green hill near the outskirts of Montgomery, its stone facade softened by wraparound porches and windows that welcomed sunlight like an old friend. It didn't look like a place where people went to wait for the end. It looked like a place where people came to live again. Emily met me at the entrance. Her cheeks were flushed, her hands clasped around a clipboard she'd long forgotten to use as anything more than a prop. She looked like someone who had finally stepped into her calling. "Are you ready?" she asked, as if I hadn't been preparing for this moment every hour of every day for the past year. I nodded slowly. "Let's begin." Guests began arriving by the dozens. Local officials, community leaders, volunteers, donors. Even a few of the residents from Magnolia Hills had come, some with walkers, others with wheelchairs, all wearing clothes that hadn't seen daylight in years. They were glowing. For the first time, many of them were being celebrated simply for having endured, for being here. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was modest. No confetti, no loud music, just quiet dignity. Emily held one end of the red ribbon. I held the other, and together we cut through the fabric with a silver pair of ceremonial scissors. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was reverent, respectful, deep. After the tour, people gathered inside the large common room where the walls had been painted a warm golden color, and soft chairs hugged the corners like welcoming arms. A mural of a magnolia tree stretched across the far wall, its roots curling into the shape of open hands. That had been my idea. Roots that gave, not just held. Roots that supported others. I gave my speech in front of that mural. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I spoke with the calm fire of someone who had found her place, not because it had been handed to her, but because she had built it with her own bruised hands. "This place exists because someone tried to silence me," I said. "Because someone thought that age means invisibility. Because I was discarded like a forgotten photograph. But let this home stand as proof that we are never too old to reclaim our worth, and we are never too quiet to change the world." Somewhere near the back of the room, I noticed Brian slip in. He stood awkwardly near the wall, his suit more modest than usual, his expression unreadable. I didn't acknowledge him, not yet. Not because I was punishing him, but because this moment wasn't about him. After the ceremony, I took a walk around the property, alone. The pathways were lined with benches and flowering shrubs. Wind chimes hung from the eaves, catching the breeze and turning it into music. I sat beneath a newly planted dogwood tree, its white blossoms trembling like fragile stars. That's when Brian approached. "Mom?" he said. I turned slightly, offering him a seat beside me. He hesitated before sitting, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "I didn't come to make trouble," he said. "I came because I needed to see it. All of it. What you did." I stayed quiet. He glanced at the mural visible through the open windows of the home. "I read an article about you last week. Said you were changing the way the South thinks about elder care. They called you the matriarch of Montgomery." I let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Catchy. He looked down. "I've been angry for a long time. Not just at you. At Dad. At myself. I kept trying to control things so I didn't have to feel powerless. I thought, if I could just manage everything, I wouldn't have to deal with the pain." I turned to him slowly. "Pain doesn't go away when you pretend it's paperwork, Brian. It just waits, grows bitter, harder to clean up." He nodded. "I see that now." A silence fell between us, but this one didn't feel hostile. It felt like the moment after a storm, when everything is still dripping but the sun has found its way back. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I just wanted to say I understand what I did, and I'm sorry." There it was again, that word. But this time, it didn't feel rehearsed. It felt earned. I looked at him for a long time. "You don't need to ask for forgiveness, Brian. You need to show it. You need to live it." He nodded. "Can I help? With the foundation? With this place?" I didn't answer right away. I watched a butterfly settle on the tip of my shoe, its wings fluttering with fragile energy. Finally, I said, "Start by volunteering. 1 morning a week, no titles, no speeches, just time." He looked surprised, but then something in his shoulders relaxed. Okay, that was it. No dramatic tears, no hugs, just an opening, a crack in the wall he had built between us. That night, I sat on my porch at Magnolia Hills, looking up at the sky. Stars winked through a curtain of clouds, and the air smelled like honeysuckle. I thought about what I had built, what had been taken from me, and what I had reclaimed. But more than anything, I thought about the future. A future where women like me weren't forgotten, where our voices carried not just in courtrooms or articles, but in living spaces filled with laughter, art, music, and light. The Penrose home wasn't just a building. It was a rebellion dressed in comfort, a protest wrapped in peace. In the weeks that followed, applications poured in. Seniors from all over Alabama, even neighboring states, wrote letters filled with hope. Some had been mistreated. Some simply wanted a place that felt like more than a waiting room for the end. We reviewed everyone. I visited the home weekly, sometimes daily. I met each new resident personally. I asked them their stories, their dreams, their favorite foods. I treated them the way I wished someone had treated me when I arrived at Magnolia Hills with a duffel bag and broken heart. One afternoon, I saw Ruthie painting again, this time with proper brushes, donated by a local art shop that read about her in our feature story. Gerald started a weekly poetry circle in the sunroom. Florence, now living full-time at Penrose, began mentoring young social workers from the nearby university. And Emily? She bloomed. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a director, a leader. And she never made a decision without first asking, would this have made Martha proud? That question became a guiding principle. As for Brian, he kept showing up, quietly, unnoticed at first. He pushed wheelchairs, played chess with residents, repaired a broken swing in the garden with his own hands. It didn't erase the past, but it carved a small space for something new, and that was enough. The climax of my life didn't come with fireworks or revenge served cold. It came with grace, with reclaimed purpose, with the slow, steady burn of dignity restored. I had found my fire, and I wasn't done burning yet. There was a certain peace that came with watching things fall into place. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like a quilt being stitched from the remnants of a chaotic life. I would walk the halls of the Penrose home and see the faces of people who had once been shadows now blooming into themselves again. Some of them smiled when they saw me. Some waved. Some just nodded with a quiet respect, the kind that doesn't need words to be understood. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't set out to become a symbol or a leader. I had simply refused to be silenced. One morning in early fall, I received a call from a woman named Nancy Lee. She introduced herself as the director of the Alabama Department of Human Services Office for Aging. She had read about our facility, seen the coverage, and wanted to meet. Not just for curiosity, she said there was a potential opportunity for state partnership. She came by the following week with her assistant and spent over an hour walking the grounds, observing, listening, asking smart questions. "I've seen many elder care centers across the state," she said, standing with me in the Penrose Library. "But what you've built here? It's not just a model. It's a movement." That word, movement, echoed in my mind for days afterward. I hadn't thought about it that way. I just wanted to stop feeling discarded. But in trying to save myself, I had unintentionally lit a path for others to follow. We'd become more than a home. We'd become a mirror held up to society, forcing people to look at how they treated their elders. The state offered a grant. With it, we were able to purchase land for a second Penrose home, this one to be built outside Birmingham. Emily cried when I told her. I didn't. I simply sat down with the architects and said, "Make it beautiful. Make it honest." Because that's what we owed them. Not luxury, not extravagance, but truth. Brian had started coming every Thursday now. He didn't announce his arrival. He'd just show up, tie on an apron, and help in the kitchen or the garden. There was something different in him, not just guilt, but purpose. Like he was slowly finding the parts of himself he'd buried beneath ambition. I watched him from a distance most days. We spoke occasionally in passing, sometimes over tea. But I never brought up the past unless he did. One day he surprised me. "I've been writing," he said, walking with me along the back trail of the property. "Journaling mostly. Stuff I should have dealt with a long time ago." I nodded. "Writing helps. I thought about publishing something eventually," he continued. "About what happened. About you. About me." I stopped walking and looked at him. "As long as it's honest," I said. "It will be," he promised. "I want to make things right." "You can't rewrite the past, Brian," I said gently. "But you can live differently now. And that matters more." He looked at me, eyes slightly misty. "I hope someday you'll forgive me." "I already have," I said. "But that doesn't mean I forget. It just means I'm not carrying the weight anymore." There was healing in that moment, though it didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like the first quiet moment after a storm has passed, and the birds return to the branches. Not because everything is perfect, but because the sky is clear enough to begin again. The original residents of Magnolia Hills had started requesting transfers to Penrose, not just for the upgraded rooms or the better food, but for the soul of the place. They wanted to be somewhere they were seen, respected, celebrated. We created a welcoming program just for them, pairing them with ambassadors from our current residents to help ease the transition. It worked better than we imagined. Gerald, the retired teacher, started mentoring young volunteers. Ruthie began teaching art classes every Saturday. Florence, ever the firebrand, launched a letter-writing campaign demanding better federal oversight for elder care programs. Her words, like mine once were finally being heard. Every time I walked through the front doors of that building, I felt like I was stepping into the truest version of myself. I was no longer just Martha Penrose, the widow, the mother who was abandoned on her birthday. I was Martha Penrose, the founder, the woman who turned pain into legacy, who refused to go quietly. One morning, I found myself alone in the meditation garden. The air was crisp. The dogwood tree we'd planted during the opening ceremony had grown, its branches spreading out like arms ready to embrace the wind. I sat on the bench beneath it and closed my eyes, listening to the soft rustling of leaves. I thought about Mark, about the way he used to hold my hand in church, about how he never got to see what I became, but somewhere deep inside, I believed he knew, and I believed he was proud. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, thick parchment, no return address. I unfolded it carefully. "Dear Martha, I've been watching from a distance, not in the literal sense, but in the way that we sometimes pay attention to things we once hurt. I didn't know how to say it in person, so I'm writing it here. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. Thank you for showing me that love isn't about control, that worth isn't measured by inheritance or bank accounts. I don't deserve your grace, but I'm grateful for it. Your son, Brian." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, not to revisit often, but to remind myself that even fractured things can find form again. We held our second annual Penrose celebration that fall. More guests, more stories, more laughter. I gave a speech that night beneath the soft string lights draped over the patio. "This isn't the end," I said. "This is just the beginning. We grow older, not smaller. We grow wiser, not weaker. And together we'll keep building spaces where that truth is not only accepted, but cherished." I looked into the crowd, at Brian, at Emily, at the residents who had become family, at the strangers who had become advocates. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I had found what so many spend a lifetime searching for. Not wealth, not power, but meaning, purpose, peace. And it had all begun the day I was left at a nursing home with a folded sweater and a broken heart. That moment, as cruel as it was, had set something unstoppable into motion, something fierce, something radiant, something mine. 5 years have passed since I first stepped into Magnolia Hills with nothing but a bag I didn't pack and a heart cracked open by betrayal. 5 years since I looked into my son's eyes and realized he saw me not as a mother, but as a liability. And 5 years since I made the quiet decision not to fade into the wallpaper of someone else's story, but to rewrite my own. Now, when I open my eyes each morning, I'm greeted not by silence or resignation, but by the sound of life. The clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the hum of morning radio drifting down the halls, the chatter of caregivers and residents who move with purpose, not out of obligation but with joy. I still live at the original Penrose home. My room looks out over the garden now, and every morning I sit by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and watch as the sunrise paints gold across the grass. It's not a grand view, but it's mine. And more than that, it's earned. The Penrose Initiative has grown beyond what any of us could have imagined. We now have 4 homes across the state: Montgomery, Birmingham, Mobile, and Huntsville, with a 5th under construction in Tuscaloosa. Each location follows the same philosophy: dignity before everything. No sterile white walls, no generic rooms. Each space is designed to feel like home, because it is home. We've helped over 800 seniors transition out of neglectful situations. Some of them had nothing but the clothes on their backs, but now they have community, friendship, and a reason to keep waking up in the morning. I'm no longer involved in day-to-day management. That torch belongs to Emily now, and no one could carry it better. She oversees operations with a gentle ferocity that makes me smile every time I watch her lead a meeting. She still visits me every evening for tea, and we talk not just about plans and policy, but about life, our families, the letters we still get, the dreams still forming. She got married 2 years ago to a kind man named David, a school counselor with the same compassionate soul. They've just welcomed a daughter, Clara. I held her when she was only a day old, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around my pinky. I whispered to her, "You come from women who fight for others, little one." Always remember that. Brian visits now every Sunday. Like church. Quiet, consistent. He helps serve lunch, plays piano for the residents, and occasionally sits beside me and reads from the journals he's still writing. He's changed. Not completely, but deeply. The sharpness in his voice is gone, replaced by something humbler, something real. He doesn't ask for praise. He simply shows up. That's enough for me. He's working on a book now, about legacy, about aging, about what he calls the silent betrayal of the people who raised us. He asked for my blessing to include our story. I gave it with one condition. "Don't make me a saint," I told him. "Make me human." He promised. We still have hard conversations. We still revisit things that sting. But the difference is, he listens now. Not with defensiveness, but with the open heart of a man who has learned that love can't be taken for granted. One afternoon, as we sat under the same dogwood tree we had years ago, he turned to me and said, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I didn't need to think long. "No," I said, "because if they had, we wouldn't be here. And here, this place, this life, it's more than I ever imagined." There's a bronze plaque by the front entrance of the original Penrose home now. It reads, "Founded by Martha Penrose, for those who were silenced, for those who were forgotten, for those who still have stories to tell." Sometimes, visitors stop and read it out loud. A few recognize the name, a few don't. That doesn't bother me. What matters is the message, the permanence of it, the fact that it will outlive me. Speaking of legacies, I've started mentoring young women who want to work in elder care reform. They come to me with wide eyes and burning questions. I tell them the truth, that it's hard, that it breaks your heart, that it builds it back again stronger. I tell them to be louder than the shame, louder than the bureaucracy, louder than the silence. We've created scholarships in Florence's name, in Gerald's, in Ruthie's. All of them have since passed, peacefully, with dignity, and surrounded by people who loved them. Their names live on, not in gravestones, but in the buildings they helped shape, in the programs they inspired. Ruthie's final painting hangs in our mobile location, an abstract piece titled Becoming. Gerald's favorite poem was engraved into the wall of our community room. Florence's old shelter reopened with new funding and now includes a wing dedicated to elder women escaping abusive homes. The ripple effect of what we did together continues, touching people we've never met. And isn't that the point? That the best parts of us stretch further than our lifetimes? I've started writing my own book too, not for fame, not even for publication, just for truth. It's a collection of stories, of reflections. I write it by hand, one page at a time. It's slow work, but I savor it. There's something sacred about writing in your own voice after being silent for so long. The last chapter is called The Day I Didn't Die, because that's what that birthday was. not the end, but a strange kind of rebirth. The moment I realized that being forgotten wasn't a death sentence, it was a challenge. One I chose to meet head on. I'm 69 now. My hands are stiffer, my steps slower, but my heart is louder than it has ever been. I don't fear the end. I've lived more in these last 5 years than I did in the 20 before them. That, to me, is enough. Sometimes I sit by the window and imagine someone else, somewhere, sitting in a room like the one I once did, feeling abandoned, overlooked. And I hope they hear my voice. I hope they find the fire. I hope they know it's not too late. You are not a burden. You are not invisible. You are not done. You are becoming. That's the word I carry with me now. Becoming. Because no matter what the world tries to take from you, it can never take your ability to grow, to rise, to begin again. This is my story, and now it's yours too. Have you ever been made to feel like a burden by someone you loved deeply? Share your experience in the comments. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to hear more powerful journeys of healing, dignity, and redemption. Forward this video to someone who might need the strength to reclaim their voice and their worth. And remember, your age does not diminish your value, and no one has the right to write your ending but you. Thank you for listening to my story.